I'm Heath Hanlin. I'm the director of Kairos 1 Square Mile. Kairos 1 Square Mile is a science communication project that aims to put VR experiences dealing with climate change for parents and children into American and international science museums. Kairos is an ambitious science communication project that incorporates climate change models and research into dramatic virtual reality environments. Our focus is to develop immersive worlds for parents and children to experience together in children's and science museums across the U.S. and internationally. What Kairos 1 Square Mile aims to do is take large amounts of really hard to understand science and climate change data and put them into a format that people can really understand, lived space. Most people are incapable of comprehending climate change on a planetary scale. It is difficult for scientists to effectively communicate the seriousness of climate change. Human beings are not driven to action by facts or abstract concepts. They're driven to action as an emotional response to sensory input and stories. Our goal is to use the tools available to us as artists to translate the work of climate scientists into stories and sensory experiences. So we're using 1 square mile as a unit of space that everybody can understand, that's large enough to see climate impact, but small enough for human beings to understand. I was inspired by the 50th anniversary of the first Apollo rocket, where we started to see the very first pictures of Earth from space. Those photographs spawned the environmental movement and were incredibly, incredibly valuable to helping humans to understand that they lived on a world that was inherently finite. The problem with the Apollo photographs and the issue that we have now is that climate change as an idea is too big and too abstract for people to understand. We can't actually understand a photograph of the Earth in a granular way. We can understand small spaces in a granular way. So the aim of Kairos is to capture natural spaces that are currently being affected by climate change and human inhabited spaces that are being affected by climate change, and put them into a format that people can work with time and work with the climate to understand the impact of human activity on the Earth. And more importantly, human activity on human inhabited areas, because the Earth doesn't really care what we're doing, but we need to care what we're doing. The core vision for Kairos is to present global warming hotspots to audiences in a visceral, multisensory manner so they may experience the pace and scale of climate change on an individual level. Kairos will translate enormous amounts of scientific data into engaging, multisensory experiences, providing the context and means for our audiences to perceive time and our climate as a set of interwoven, multi-generational challenges. In addition to focusing on global hotspots, we will create custom experiences for each city or institution that hosts the exhibit, using regional climate information as a way of building empathy for the other communities represented in the exhibit. We will perform a thorough survey of a square mile, taking cues from film production, game production, geographical surveys, botanical surveys, and zoological surveys, as well as ethnographic surveys for areas that were inhabited or once were. We will spend a week on site, conducting these surveys, as well as making an extensive photographic and observational drawing record of light, color, and shadow within the square mile. And we try to learn as much as we can about 1 square mile. We learn about the plants that are there, the animals that are there, the terrain. We learn about what it was like thousands of years ago, and we try to project what it's going to be like in another 1,000 years, whether there's human activity or not. And then we also try to learn about the cultures that have lived there over time, whether it's a culture that's currently there or a culture that was previously there and displaced. Once we have the survey data, we start working with a team of artists to recreate this in virtual reality. And once we have this recreated in virtual reality, we use climate change models to push the models through the VR experience to give people a sense of how human activity is affecting climate change and creating climate change. Once we have our data and visual and audio studies, we will work with a team of artists as well as our survey team to recreate the square mile in VR using 3D computer graphics techniques and physical simulations. Using these techniques will give us exact control over what our audience sees, meaning we can then work with climate and weather models to show the kinds of systematic changes that climate change will create in these places, allowing audiences to experience this in a visceral manner. We're planning our first survey of Long Beach this summer. That isn't happening. With COVID-19, it's just too dangerous to have people working in such close proximity, and it's too dangerous to have so many people traveling. So instead, I'm working with a small team on a proof of concept, which will be a playable game that will allow us to fundraise and generate more revenue and interest in the project. We're very excited for this, and I'm working with an amazing team of artists spread out from New York City to Los Angeles to Wellington, New Zealand, all working together towards this common goal. We're hopeful that we'll be able to conduct our survey next summer after we have the proof of concept in place. So it's funny, I'll be honest with you, I was incredibly depressed in April. I really thought that the project was dead. I didn't think people were going to go back to museums. I wasn't sure how we were going to deal with VR goggles. And to be honest, I'm still not sure how we're going to deal with VR goggles in a public place. Some of my folks are currently working with a maker of PPE and a maker of VR headsets to come up with a sanitation protocol. That's really interesting work. I'm also in talks with a couple companies that do virtual set production in terms of how we can create black boxes for museums. This would be much more expensive than goggles, but it's worth looking into. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions now.